She pressed her palms to her face, voice cracking. "I've done nothing but fail. I'm just a burden." The tall black man leaned closer, his eyes steady and full of something she hadn't seen in years. Belief. "Claire, you were never a burden. You're the woman I want. Will you marry me? For real?" Her breath caught, heart pounding, as everything she thought she'd lost came crashing back in one impossible question. The following morning, Claire woke to the sound of children's voices echoing down the shelter hallways. For a second, she thought she was back in her old house, Lila's laughter drifting down the staircase while sunlight filtered through bay windows. But then the fluorescent hum, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, and the faint smell of oatmeal reminded her where she was. Lila stirred beside her. "Is it still real, Mommy? Or was it a bad dream?" Claire smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "It's real, baby. But remember what Mr. Marcus said. This is just where we start again." She forced cheer into her tone, though her stomach knotted with fear. What if Marcus was wrong? What if she couldn't rebuild? What if this was as good as it would ever get? The dining hall buzzed with activity, long tables lined with families, volunteers hustling behind counters, trays of oatmeal and toast being passed down the line. Claire felt everyone's eyes when she entered, though she knew most were too wrapped in their own worries to notice. Lila clung to her leg until a grandmotherly voice cut through the noise. "Well, there's our new family," said a tall black woman with kind eyes and silver threads woven through her braids. She wore an apron dusted with flour, her smile warm enough to rival the steam from the oatmeal pots. "I'm Ruth Reed, Marcus's mama. You must be Claire. And this little one?" She bent low, her hands soft on Lila's shoulders. "You must be Miss Lila." Lila ducked her head shyly. Ruth chuckled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I've got pancakes hiding back here just for brave girls like you." Claire blinked at the unexpected kindness. "You didn't have to." "Oh, hush," Ruth said, waving her off. "Nobody survives this world alone. Sit, eat. You'll need your strength." As they found seats, Claire noticed how Ruth carried herself with authority, moving between tables like a queen in her kingdom, making sure every plate was full. Something about it soothed her, like being wrapped in a blanket she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Across the table, a Latina woman with tired eyes and a smile that held both exhaustion and resilience leaned over. "First night?" "Yes," Claire admitted, still reluctant to give away more than that. "I'm Marisol Vega. This is my boy, Nico." She gestured to a lanky 8-year-old, balancing toast on his spoon to make his sister laugh. 3 weeks here. Lost my job. Couldn't keep the apartment. Not exactly how I thought life would go." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it with a shrug. "But it's not as bad as I feared. Staff actually want us to succeed." Claire hesitated, then surprised herself by whispering, "My husband left. Gambling. Bankruptcy. Everything gone in 3 months." Marisol reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I'm sorry, but you're here, and you're fighting for your little girl. That makes you stronger than you think." Claire's eyes stung, but she blinked back the tears. She couldn't cry here, not in front of Lila, not in front of strangers. And yet, it felt good, almost relieving, to say the words out loud without pretense. Later, as Claire gathered her courage to explore the shelter, Marcus appeared again, clipboard in hand, the corners of his smile gentle but firm. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. Claire gave a half shrug. "Better than the car." "That's progress," he said simply, as though progress could be measured in inches, not miles. "Listen, I want to walk you through some resources. We'll take it slow, one step at a time." He led her to a small office, its walls lined with binders and flyers. Lila skipped toward the children's area, where volunteers greeted her with crayons and puzzles. Claire stood awkwardly, her hands twisting in her lap as Marcus settled behind the desk. "You said you worked in marketing," he began, scanning her intake form. "That's a valuable skill in this city. Tech startups, non-profits, small businesses, they all need storytellers." Claire let out a bitter laugh. "Who's going to hire a woman living in a homeless shelter?" Marcus didn't flinch. "More people than you think. But even if they didn't, you've still got the skills. We just need to rebuild the confidence to use them." His voice carried such conviction it startled her. For months she'd been living in shadows, shrinking, ashamed. And here was this man, looking at her like she was still whole. "Why do you believe in me so much?" she whispered. He leaned back, folding his arms. Because someone once sat in that chair when I didn't believe in myself. They told me I was worth saving. Now I pay it forward." Claire's breath caught. No one had told her she was worth saving in a long time. Over the next days, Marcus became a steady presence. He explained the shelter's programs, introduced her to job training opportunities, and reminded her, gently, persistently, that rebuilding wasn't about perfection, but persistence. Each time she doubted, he countered with truth. One afternoon, while Claire worked on a resume draft in the computer lab, Marcus leaned against the doorway. "You're different than when you came in," he observed. "How so?" "You walk straighter. You look people in the eye. You don't hide behind that hoodie anymore." Claire glanced down at her thrift store blouse, cheeks warming. She wanted to tell him it wasn't true, that she still felt like a burden, still feared she'd never reclaim her dignity. But deep inside, a spark flickered. Small, fragile, but real. Weeks passed. Claire attended workshops, updated her resume, and even began smiling more often. Lila flourished in the children's program, always running back with drawings of families, sometimes just her and Mommy, but lately with Marcus drawn in too, tall and steady beside them. Claire pretended not to notice, though her chest tightened every time. Then came the day Marcus approached with a flyer. "Orientation tomorrow," he said. 12-week job training program. Professional skills, interviews, internships. I think you should try." Claire stared at the paper, her pulse racing. "I'm not ready." "You are," he countered softly. "You don't need to feel ready. You just need to show up." That night, Claire lay awake in the narrow dorm bed, Lila's soft breathing beside her. She remembered the woman she had been, draped in silk, living in marble halls, admired but empty. And she thought of the woman she was becoming here, scarred, trembling, but honest. Perhaps even stronger. She turned onto her side, staring at the shadows on the wall. For months, she had believed she was nothing but a burden. But Marcus, he looked at her differently. Like maybe, just maybe, she still had worth. And though she would never admit it out loud, a dangerous thought crept into her chest as she closed her eyes. What if he was right? The shelter door's rain slid down the cracked sidewalks of Oakland, pooling at the bottom of the steps leading to the Hope Haven community shelter. Claire Donovan pulled her hoodie lower over her face, not to hide from the rain, but from the world. Her once manicured hands clutched the tiny palm of her daughter, Lila, who was only 6, but already understood too much. "Mommy, is this our new house?" Lila whispered, her small voice trembling. Claire's throat tightened. 3 months ago, she had been driving a luxury SUV through the winding hills of Piedmont, slipping into cocktail dresses for charity dinners and fielding calls from private school admissions officers. Her thick, curvy figure had been wrapped in designer fabrics, her blonde hair gleaming under the soft lighting of a mansion foyer. Now her only expensive possession was a leather purse that looked absurd against the faded jeans she had pulled from a thrift store rack. "No, baby," Claire whispered, forcing a smile. "Just a place to stay for a little while, until Mommy figures things out." The truth was harsher. There was nothing left to figure out. Her husband's gambling had swallowed their lives whole. Mortgages hidden behind charm, credit cards stacked like dynamite, until everything exploded in a court order stamped bankruptcy. Then he vanished. The house was gone, the car repossessed, the future stolen. Claire swallowed hard as they pushed through the shelter's heavy doors. Fluorescent lights stung her eyes. The sharp scent of disinfectant clawed at her throat. Families hunched in plastic chairs clutched bags like lifelines. Some had eyes that darted with shame. Others stared blankly, already used to the grind of invisibility. Claire lowered her gaze, hoping no one recognized her. At the intake desk, a weary woman with glasses pushed paperwork forward. "First time?" Claire nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, just temporary. Fill these out. I'll need ID for both of you." Her hands trembled as she signed, her pen scratching the forms with reluctant honesty. No income, no housing, no emergency contacts. She wanted to vanish into the floor. "Mommy," Lila tugged at her sleeve. "Can we sit?" Claire nodded, leading her to a pair of cracked plastic chairs in the corner. She sat stiffly, hugging her purse against her hip as though it could guard her from the judging eyes of strangers. "Excuse me," a voice said, warm and deep. Claire looked up. A tall black man stood before her, his jeans worn but clean, a shelter volunteer T-shirt stretched across broad shoulders. His presence was calm, almost grounding, as if the chaos of the room bent around his steadiness. His eyes were dark, soulful, and direct, not pitying, not prying, just seeing. "I'm Marcus Reed," he said gently. "One of the outreach coordinators here. First time in?" Claire nodded, throat too tight to speak. Marcus crouched so his gaze met Lila's. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" "Lila," she said shyly, hiding behind her mother's arm. "That's beautiful," Marcus said with a smile. "I bet this feels a little scary. But here's something important to know. You belong here." Claire's head snapped up. "Belong here?" Marcus met her eyes, steady and unwavering. "I mean that you deserve help. You deserve kindness. You deserve to be safe. You belong in a place where people treat you with dignity, no matter what brought you here." The words cracked something inside her. Belong. She hadn't felt like she belonged anywhere in months, not in the cold of their car, not in the pitying gaze of old friends who stopped answering her calls. "I don't feel strong," Claire whispered before she could stop herself. "I feel like I failed." Marcus shook his head. "Walking through those doors isn't failure. It's courage, especially with your daughter depending on you." Lila tugged at his shirt timidly. "Are you going to help us find a place to sleep?" Marcus smiled. "I'll help you find more than that. But yes, let's start with a bed and a safe room tonight." For the first time in weeks, Claire's chest loosened. The family dormitory was cramped, privacy curtains dividing thin mattresses, the air thick with exhaustion, but it was warm, safe and dry. Claire tucked Lila into bed, her heart aching as her daughter murmured, "At least it's not the car, Mommy." When Marcus returned with a packet of forms and a clipboard, Claire felt the weight of his presence settle like reassurance. "You'll get 30 days here," he explained. "During that time we'll work on housing leads, job training, child care support. There's a path forward." Claire's laugh was bitter. "I used to be a marketing director. I built campaigns for million-dollar accounts. Now I can't even fill out a housing form without shaking." "Crisis doesn't discriminate," Marcus said simply. "I've seen veterans, teachers, nurses and CEOs sit where you're sitting now. What matters isn't how you got here. It's what you do next." Something in his voice, calm, certain, lived, made her ask quietly, "Why are you here? Why do you care?" His eyes flickered with memory. "Because 4 years ago I was you, homeless, addicted, back from Afghanistan with nothing but nightmares and bad choices. This place, these people, they saved me, showed me that rock bottom isn't the end. It can be the foundation for a new life." Claire felt her throat burn. "And now you help others." "And now I help others," Marcus said with a small, proud smile. When he left them to settle in, Claire lay awake long after Lila's breathing turned slow and even. His words echoed, "You belong here." For months she had been certain she was nothing but a burden. A failed wife, a failing mother, a woman reduced to begging for a bed. But tonight, as she closed her eyes in the shelter's worn sheets, she felt the faintest flicker of something she had thought was gone forever. Hope. That's Chapter 1, 1,000 words, rewritten in a way that sets up the arc toward your requested title. She thought she was just a burden, until the black man asked her, "Will you marry me for real?" The classroom at East Bay Renewal Center smelled faintly of dry erase marker and coffee that had burned on a warmer a little too long. 20 chairs formed a lopsided horseshoe. Resumes with red pen scribbles were stacked on a side table like unfinished homework. Claire paused in the doorway, one hand on her hip, the other smoothing the thrifted blouse that somehow fit her curves as if it had been made for her. She felt the familiar pinch of doubt along her ribs and the unfamiliar tug of wanting to be seen anyway. "Welcome, everyone," said a young facilitator with sharp eyes and a sun-bright grin. "I'm Diego Alvarez, program coordinator. You're here because you're not giving up." He tapped the board where he'd written 3 words: dignity, direction, discipline. We build from those. Claire took the last seat on the curve. To her left, a woman with a pixie cut drummed anxious fingers on her knee. To her right, a man with a military haircut stared at his boots as if the floor might swallow him if he looked up. Claire recognized their expressions. She had worn them for months. Diego passed out index cards. Write 3 things you're good at. Don't overthink it. Strategic planning, storytelling, making people feel safe. Her hand paused over the last one. She wasn't entirely sure it belonged on the card. until she glanced at Lila through the glass panel of the door, where a volunteer held up a paper crown she'd coloured. Lila laughed, open-mouthed, head tipped back. Safe. Yes. Claire pressed the final loop of the F and slid the card to the centre of the desk. Now, Diego said, pair up. Tell your partner a story about a time you solved a problem when you had no resources. The words triggered the ache behind Claire's sternum. No resources had described her for months. She turned to the pixie-cut woman. I'm Naomi, the woman said, offering a small smile. You start. Your eyes look like they've been carrying something. Claire inhaled. Then the story tumbled out. The locked storage unit, the car that died the same day, the way she'd bartered an hour of social media setup for a tow, when the driver recognized her last name as the people who used to own the house with the glass staircase. She told it plain, not heroic, voice steady even when her throat tightened. Naomi blinked rapidly. You are a storyteller. Claire had never felt such relief at a stranger's observation. She wasn't a tragic headline. She was useful. Diego clapped once. Quick share-outs. Anyone hear a story that shouted, hire me? Several hands pointed at Claire. Heat rose along her neck. She sat up a little straighter. The next week unfolded with a rhythm that made sense. Mornings at workshops, afternoons in the computer lab, evenings helping Lila with reading worksheets on the narrow bed they shared. Claire relearned interview etiquette and the difference between bravado and confidence. She practiced power statements that didn't sound like apology. I led. I built. I learned. I can. On Wednesday, Diego slid a folder across the table. Internship lead. Harbour Homes Coalition. They work on tenant protections and transitional housing. They need a communications intern who can turn policy into human language. Claire's stomach swooped. They'll see my shelter address. Then they'll see your clarity, Diego said. We don't hide truth here. We use it. She scanned the position description, pulse thrumming, draft narratives, interview residents, support media outreach, design campaigns that move people. She could do all of it. In her bones, she wanted to do it. The wanting frightened her almost as much as the possibility she'd fail. Breathe, Diego said, as if he could hear the freight train inside her ribs. You're ready. That evening, Marcus found Claire in the computer lab, cheeks lit by the monitor's glow. She'd pinned her hair, and the sweep of her neck looked like a small declaration against shame. He set a paper cup on the desk. Tea. Don't worry, I convinced my mom to add extra honey. Claire wrapped her fingers around the warmth. Harbour Homes, interview Friday. Good, they're the real deal. He met her eyes. You're going to be the real deal right back. She laughed softly. You always sound so sure. I've learned not to doubt obvious things. Like what? He took a breath, then pointed at her screen. Like the way your cover letter reads. It's clean, it's brave, and it's you. Claire glanced down at the final paragraph she'd wrestled with for an hour. I used to tell stories to sell things. Now I want to tell stories that make space for people. Housing is not an abstract issue to me. It's a dinner table, a child's homework corner, a mother's exhale. I am rebuilding. I can help others see why that matters. Too much? She asked. It's perfect, Marcus said, voice low. It's honest. They didn't speak for a moment. The hum of old computers filled the quiet. Somewhere in the hall, Lila laughed again. Claire's mouth softened at the sound. Marcus watched it happen, understanding flickering across his face like light through leaves. Come on, he said finally. My mom smuggled out extra cornbread for you and Lila. Don't tell the line cooks. Claire blinked against sudden tears she refused to let fall. You and Ruth are going to ruin me for ordinary kindness. That's the goal, he said, smiling. The Harbour Homes office sat on the second floor of a converted warehouse near Jack London Square, where the smell of the bay sneaked through cracked windows and the walls were covered with maps of neighbourhoods shaded by eviction rates. Claire arrived 15 minutes early in a navy dress she and Ruth had repaired with invisible stitches. She tugged at the hem and told herself she looked like a woman on her way forward. The communications director, Janet Wu, greeted her with an outstretched hand and an assessing gaze that somehow didn't feel harsh. Your cover letter stayed with me, she said. Shall we talk? They settled into an office where file boxes lined the wall like an unfinished skyline. You've led large campaigns, Janet said, flipping through Claire's portfolio. Why Harbour Homes? Claire could have recited a dozen polished answers. Instead, she told the truth. Because I lost my home, and because I learned it wasn't just my husband's gambling. It was thin safety nets and rent that rose like a fever and policies written for someone else's life. She inhaled. I want to be useful. Janet's expression shifted. Approval, yes, but something like relief, too. We need people who can speak both languages, policy and kitchen table. She set the portfolio down. How do you avoid exploiting people's pain when you tell their stories? I don't show only pain, Claire said. I show capacity. I ask permission. I keep people whole. Janet leaned back, fingers steepled. Good answer. Before the hour was over, they had mapped a potential campaign around after-school displacement, how kids lose classrooms when families lose leases. Claire outlined a series of short videos centering children's voices, paired with policy explainers, translated into plain language. Janet's questions were rigorous, but she nodded as if some long search had finally ended. There's one last thing, Janet said gently. Your current address. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's the shelter, for now. How has that changed the way you work? Janet asked. It wasn't judgment. It was curiosity, respect. Claire sat up straighter. It made me faster at hearing what people don't say, she replied. It made me stubborn about the word dignity. It made me unafraid to ask for what families actually need, not what looks good in a newsletter. Janet smiled, and just like that, the air shifted. We'll be in touch by Friday. On her way back to Hope Haven, Claire stopped on the sidewalk and let the bay wind push the hair off her face. She realized she was standing taller. The world hadn't changed. The rent was still too high, the light still too bright, the future still uncertain, but something inside her had. She wanted this work. She wanted this life. In the lobby, Marcus waited with a grin that said he'd been there longer than he would admit. How'd it go? She opened her mouth and surprised herself by laughing, the sound bright in the sterile air. I told the truth, and they didn't flinch. Of course they didn't. Marcus, she said softer, I felt like myself in there. Not the version I was trying to resuscitate. A truer one. I know, he said. I saw it the day you walked in, even under that hoodie. You have a very high opinion of me. I have an accurate one, he corrected. Something warm and frightening lifted in her chest. She didn't name it. Not yet. Instead, she said, thank you for not treating me like a problem to fix. You were never a problem, he said. You were a person who deserved to be met. For a long breath, neither of them moved. Then Lila barreled into the lobby with a paper crown and a glittered sign that read home. She thrust it up between them proudly. Miss Ruth says we can put this over our new bed, Lila announced. Claire smoothed her daughter's hair. I'd like that. Marcus cleared his throat. Speaking of beds, housing cooled. There's an opening at Fruitvale Commons. 2 bedrooms. It's transitional, sliding scale. You'd be close to Lila's school and the bus line. Claire's vision blurred. You're serious? I made them promise not to tell you until after your interview, he said, eyes shining. I didn't want you to mix the victories. The word victories landed like a blessing. Claire pressed her hand to her sternum as if to keep her heart from climbing out. Go see it tomorrow, Marcus said. Let yourself imagine putting that sign on a real door. Claire looked at him then, really looked, at the scar tucked beneath his jawline, at the steadiness in the line of his mouth, at the way he always left a beat of silence for her to step into her own strength. Gratitude flared so hot it felt like its own kind of grief, for the years she'd spent without it, and for the possibility of years with it. Marcus, she whispered, not sure what she meant to say until it was already said. I don't know how to repay you. You already are, he said. You're not hiding anymore. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Claire lay awake in the dim dorm light, the paper crown propped on the chair like a sentinel. She listened to the corridor hush, to the distant hum of Oakland's night. In the space where panic used to live, a new sound took root, soft and steady, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. Tomorrow, she would tour an apartment. By Friday, she might have a place to work that felt like purpose rather than penance. And somewhere between those 2 steps, a man who had learned mercy the hard way had taught her to say her life out loud without flinching. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in a long while, believed in the sentence waiting for her on the other side of sleep. there is more than survival. The morning air in Oakland carried the scent of wet asphalt and possibility. Claire stood on the small balcony of the Fruitvale Commons unit, still half in disbelief that the key in her hand unlocked a door that belonged to her and Lila, even if only temporarily. The apartment was modest, peeling paint in the corners, a stove older than she was, but it had 2 bedrooms and windows that opened to the sound of children playing in the courtyard. It had space for Lila's drawings, for her own books, for dinners at a table instead of hunched in a dormitory bed. It had dignity. Inside, Lila skipped between the rooms with her paper crown perched on her head. "This one's mine," she declared, collapsing onto the bare carpet of the smaller room. She stretched her arms wide. "I can sleep right here." Claire laughed, the sound foreign and liberating. "We'll get a bed soon, silly girl." She crouched down and brushed hair from Lila's forehead. "But yes, this is yours." The shelter staff had helped them move what little they had, but it was Marcus who had carried most of the boxes up the stairs. He filled the doorway now, leaning casually against the frame, watching as Claire and Lila took ownership of the space. He looked different here, in the soft afternoon light, less like a volunteer ticking tasks off a clipboard, more like a man who belonged in their lives. "You did it," he said simply. Claire shook her head. "We did it. I couldn't have." Marcus cut her off gently. "Don't diminish your own strength, Claire. You walked through those shelter doors. You kept showing up. That's you." Her throat thickened. For months she had felt invisible, defined only by loss and failure. Yet every time Marcus looked at her, it was as if he saw not just who she had been, but who she was becoming. 2 days later, her phone rang with a call from Harbour Homes Coalition. Janet's voice was crisp but warm. "Claire, we'd like to offer you the internship. Orientation starts Monday. There's a small stipend attached. Will that work for you?" Claire clutched the phone until her knuckles whitened. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." After she hung up, she sank onto the floor and pressed her palms to her face. Lila bounded in from her room, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "What happened, Mommy?" Claire opened her arms. "I got the job, baby. Mommy's going back to work." Lila squealed and wrapped herself around her. "Does that mean we can stay here forever?" Claire held her tightly. "Not forever, but long enough. Long enough to build something new." Her first day at Harbour Homes was like stepping into a different version of herself. She walked into the converted warehouse with her hair pinned neatly, her curves wrapped in a donated blazer that felt like armor and rebirth all at once. She was no longer hiding behind thrift store anonymity. She was presenting herself as she was, a woman who had fallen and was learning how to stand again. Janet greeted her with a brisk handshake. "We're glad you're here, Claire. We need your perspective." Those words steadied her through the day as she dove into drafts of outreach emails, brainstormed campaign slogans with the policy director, and suggested ways to highlight personal stories without reducing people to caricatures. She caught herself speaking with conviction she hadn't realized she still possessed. She remembered what it felt like to build narratives that mattered. That evening, exhausted but buzzing with energy, she returned to Fruitvale Commons to find Marcus waiting outside her door. He had groceries in his arms, vegetables, rice, chicken, even a bottle of cheap but cheerful wine. "You shouldn't have," she said, though her heart warmed at the sight. "It's not charity," he replied. "It's celebration. First day deserves dinner." In the tiny kitchen, they cooked together while Lila drew at the table. Claire chopped onions, Marcus handled the skillet, and the air filled with the scent of garlic and possibility. She caught herself watching him, the easy way he moved, the steadiness in his hands, the way he included Lila in conversation without ever patronizing her. After dinner, when Lila had drifted off to sleep on her mattress, Claire and Marcus sat on the balcony with the wine. The city lights glittered below, alive and relentless. "I felt like myself again today," Claire said softly. Marcus glanced at her. "Not the old self you lost, the real one you're finding." She smiled. "Maybe both." He turned his gaze back to the skyline. "When I came back from Afghanistan, I thought my life was over. Addiction, street corners, shame. I thought I was nothing but a burden. But people at the shelter, they wouldn't let me believe that. Now I get to pass it forward." His words sank into her like seeds, taking root. For weeks she had fought the sense that she was nothing but weight dragging others down. But sitting beside him, the wine warming her chest, the city stretching before them, she felt something dangerous and thrilling. She felt wanted, not for what she had, but for who she was. Their evenings became a rhythm. She'd return from harbour homes with stories of campaigns and community meetings. Lila would chatter about school and the aftercare programme, and Marcus would appear with groceries or small fixes for the apartment. Slowly, Claire realised that the lines between friend, mentor and something more were blurring. He was not just part of her rebuilding, he was becoming part of her life. One night, after she finished presenting her first campaign strategy to the Harbour Homes Board, Marcus met her at the community centre to walk her home. She talked fast, excitement tumbling out of her as they crossed cracked sidewalks. "They actually listen to me, Marcus. My ideas, my perspective. They want me to lead the next phase." He grinned, his eyes crinkling. "Of course they do. You're brilliant." Her laughter spilled into the night. "When you say it, I almost believe it." "Believe it," he said, his tone suddenly firm. He stopped walking, turning to face her under the halo of a streetlight. "Claire, you're not just surviving anymore. You're building, and it's beautiful to watch." Her heart stumbled. For a long moment the world narrowed to his gaze, the quiet night, and the truth she felt pulsing between them. She wanted to reach for him, to let herself fall into the warmth he offered. But fear coiled sharp in her chest, fear of need, of loss, of making herself vulnerable again. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you," and began walking once more. But in her chest, something had shifted. The thought that had haunted her since the day she entered the shelter was unravelling. Maybe she wasn't a burden. Maybe she was worth love, worth belonging, worth being chosen. And maybe, just maybe, Marcus was the one who saw that all along. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm Claire hadn't believed possible. Work that mattered, a home that felt safe, and evenings filled with laughter instead of dread. At Harbour Homes, her projects gained traction quickly. She had a knack for turning dense policy into human stories, narratives that made donors open their wallets and made city officials lean forward in their chairs. Each time a campaign meeting ended, Janet would clap her shoulder and say, That's what we needed." For the first time in years, Claire felt irreplaceable. At home, Lila flourished. Her drawings expanded from paper crowns and stick figures to elaborate sketches of houses with gardens and families that looked suspiciously like the three of them: her, Claire, and Marcus. He visited often, always with something in his hands, a bag of groceries, a set of tools, or simply time. He never came empty-hearted either. He was steady, present, as though showing up was his sacred vow. One Sunday evening, Claire returned from church with Ruth, who had insisted on introducing her to the congregation. When they entered the apartment, Marcus was already there, cooking chili in her kitchen. The sight made Claire pause in the doorway, warmth spreading through her chest. The domesticity of it, the smell of spices, the sound of Lila chattering at his elbow, felt like something she had only ever dreamed of. After dinner, when Lila fell asleep, curled under a blanket, Marcus lingered at the table, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "Claire, there's something I need to ask you." Her pulse quickened. The seriousness in his eyes unnerved her, though not in a frightening way. She braced herself. "You've been rebuilding," he began, "piece by piece, and I've been honoured to watch it happen. But you need to know something. You're not a burden. Not to me. Not to anyone who matters." The words pierced her carefully built defences. She swallowed hard. "I've believed for so long that all I did was drag people down. Even now, sometimes I wonder if you help me out of pity." His gaze sharpened, steady as bedrock. "Pity? Claire, you think I show up because I feel sorry for you? No. I show up because I want to, because I can't imagine not, because somewhere between the shelter and this apartment, you became home to me." Her breath caught. "Home?" He leaned forward, voice lower now, intimate. "Yes, you and Lila, the way you fight for her, the way you fought for yourself. You taught me that rebuilding isn't weakness, it's courage, and I love you for it." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She pressed her hand to her mouth, the truth of his words unravelling the shame she had carried like armour. She wanted to respond, but the words tangled in her throat. Marcus reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. Claire Donovan, will you marry me for real? The room tilted. She had imagined this possibility in secret moments, when she dared to let hope creep in, but hearing it out loud stunned her. For real, she whispered, needing to be sure. For real, he said, his eyes holding hers without a flicker of doubt. Not as someone to fix, not as a project, as my partner, as the woman I choose every day. Her tears spilled then, but they were not tears of shame, they were release. Yes, she breathed, the word trembling and certain all at once. Yes, Marcus. Absolutely yes. He exhaled like a man carrying a weight too long. Then he stood, pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a gentleness that was also a promise. Behind them from the bedroom, a small, sleepy voice piped up, "Does this mean Mr. Marcus is my daddy now?" They broke apart, laughing through their tears. Marcus crouched down as Lila padded into the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "Only if you're okay with that," he said softly. Lila tilted her head, considering with the seriousness only a child could manage. "Are you going to stay? Like forever stay?" Marcus nodded. "Forever." A smile broke across her face. "Then yes, you can be Daddy Marcus." Claire's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. In that moment she knew she was not a burden. She was a woman chosen, loved, and seen, by a man who understood brokenness and still called her whole. The wedding was simple, held at the community centre where they had first met. Ruth cooked enough food to feed 3 times the guests. Marisol organised decorations and Harbour Home's colleagues filled the folding chairs. Claire walked down the aisle in a dress borrowed from the donation closet, altered by a volunteer seamstress. She had never felt more radiant. Marcus stood waiting, nervous energy in his stance, but love clear in his eyes. When Pastor Johnson asked her to speak her vows, Claire's voice trembled but carried. "I thought I was nothing but a burden," she said. "I thought my story ended in shame, but then you looked at me and saw more. You saw strength where I saw failure. You gave me back my dignity, and you gave Lila back her laughter. I promise to honour that for the rest of my life." Marcus's vows were simple but fierce. "You're not my project. You're my partner. You're not someone I help. You're someone I build with. Claire, I promise to show up, to stay, and to love both of you with everything I have." When the pronouncement came, the applause shook the walls. Ruth cried openly, Marisol whooped, and Lila danced down the aisle like the flower girl she had declared herself to be. That night, back in their modest apartment, Claire sat on the balcony with Marcus, her new husband. The city lights glimmered, and for the first time in years her chest felt light. She leaned into him, his arm wrapping around her with an ease that felt eternal. "Do you regret it?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Not for a second," he said. "Do you?" She shook her head, her smile breaking free, not for a single breath. Lila's laughter echoed from inside, mingling with the hum of Oakland's night. Claire closed her eyes, letting the warmth of Marcus's embrace and the promise of their future settle deep into her bones. She had thought she was just a burden, but she had been wrong. She was loved. She was chosen. She was home.